Welcome back to Church in the World. This is part 2 of our series on abortion, and that is to say, on the social statement of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America on the topic of abortion. We laid some foundation about how the Church supports and seeks to protect all life and believes all life is created by God and given by God and is worthy of inherent value and respect. And so today we have to talk about brass tacks. So, I'm pregnant. I have to make some decisions. This is then part 2. Once pregnancy is the reality we're in, we only really have a binary: to continue the pregnancy to term or to end the pregnancy. Those are the only options that really exist, but there are some caveats in each of them. Because of the Christian presumption to preserve and protect life, the statement reads on page 6, "This church, the ELCA, in most circumstances encourages women, even with unintended pregnancies, to continue the pregnancy." Why? Well, pregnancy is hard, being a parent is hard, arrangements vary, needs vary, all sorts of things happen. But, generally speaking, faith and trust in God's promises has the power to sustain people in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. There's also, of course, always the option of adoption. The Church encourages and seeks to support adoption as a positive option and alternative to abortion. And so the Church wants to encourage that and make adoption more realistic and more encouraged and more honored for all people, especially in the case of adopting those children who may be born with special needs that perhaps the genetic parents won't be able to respond to well. On the other hand, remember, we just said in part 1, there should never be a circumstance where the parents are placed in a situation where they are unable to meet the needs of their children because of something like finances or social order. That is already a problem, and that needs to be addressed separately because that's an issue of an injustice that has created a situation where the parent is discerning whether or not to terminate a pregnancy, to end a pregnancy. And that's a huge problem. So, those are functionally the two options for continuing the pregnancy, and that is generally the position that the ELCA encourages in a vacuum. But the Church recognizes there can be sound reasons for ending the pregnancy through induced abortion. We recognize conscientious decisions need to be made in relationship to different circumstances that vary greatly. What is a morally responsible decision in one situation may not be morally responsible in another. In reflecting ethically on what should be done in the case of an unintended pregnancy, consideration should be given to the status and condition of the life in the womb. We also need to consider the conditions under which the pregnancy occurred and the implications of the pregnancy for the woman's life. Okay? So, again, the question isn't just, yes, it's a life, therefore you can't have an abortion. Unfortunately, life is more complicated than that. Or fortunately, honestly, because without that, we wouldn't actually be in relationship with each other. So here are some things that the ELCA has said. An abortion is morally responsible in those cases in which the continuation of a pregnancy presents a clear threat to the physical life of the woman. Full stop. So already we've blown up this whole dichotomy between abortion is always right or abortion is always wrong. Right? That's not what we're saying. We've dealt a lot with why it's not always right. We've talked a lot about it. It's not always morally irresponsible. It is morally responsible to save the life of a woman when an abortion, when a continuation of pregnancy presents a clear threat to that woman's physical life. A woman also should not be morally obligated to carry the resulting pregnancy to term if pregnancy occurs when both parties do not participate willingly in sexual intercourse. That is to say, when the woman has been raped, because that's what rape is when a woman does not willingly participate in sexual intercourse. The document doesn't use the word rape, which is interesting. I'm sure there's a reason why in this endnote E. This is especially true in cases of rape and incest. Presumably it means something else by not participating willingly beyond rape and incest. I'm not sure what that would mean. This can also be the case in some situations in which women are somewhat dominated and oppressed. They have no choice regarding sexual intercourse and little access to contraceptives. Ooh, interesting. So, again, if you don't have access to contraception, we don't have the right to condemn you for choosing to end a pregnancy, right? So again, we go back to the social conditions in which the pregnancy occurs. If there's no access to contraceptives, right, the church shouldn't be going after people who are making choices about ending pregnancies. We need to talk about why on earth are contraceptives not available in this society? That's really weird. What's going on here? This, of course, will upset a great many people, one hopes, who were very much a fan of the generally you should carry the pregnancy to term. Some conceptions occur under dehumanizing conditions that are contrary to God's purposes, right? That's just true. There are also circumstances of extreme fetal abnormality, which will result in severe suffering and very early death of an infant. In such cases, after competent medical consultations, the parent or parents may responsibly choose to terminate the pregnancy. Whether they choose to continue or to end such pregnancies, the Church supports the parents with compassion and recognizes the struggle involved in the decision. However, of course, the closer to term you are in the pregnancy, and the closer the life in the womb comes to full term, the more serious the issues around ending pregnancy become. When a child can survive outside of the womb, it becomes possible for other people, and not only the mother, to nourish and care for the child. And this church, of course, I feel like this doesn't need to be said, but this church opposes ending intrauterine life when a fetus is developed enough to live outside a uterus with the aid of reasonable and necessary technology. If a pregnancy needs to be interrupted after this point, every reasonable and necessary effort should be made to support this life, unless there are lethal fetal abnormalities indicating that the prospective newborn will die very soon. In other words, if a child can survive outside of the womb, terminating the pregnancy is no longer really a thing, except in extreme abnormality cases for the fetus, right? At that point, the child can survive and be brought into being raised and parented. And so this is no longer kids turning a pregnancy. The statement goes on. Our biblical and confessional commitments provide the basis for us to continue deliberating together on the moral issues related to these decisions. We have the responsibility to make the best possible decisions in light of the information available to us and our sense of the accountability to God, neighbor, and self. In these decisions, we must ultimately rely on the grace of God. And so here is the first time I'm going to go off script on this part of the series. And I'm going to say something really important that you're going to need to hear a lot. Most people think that Christian ethics is a matter of the church tells you what you should do, and that's the end of the story. But that kind of oversimplifies how life works, right? Life is messy. Just look at what happens to my hair by the end of the day, right? It's not as coiffed as it normally is. It's just not, right? Life is messy, and the longer we live, the more we will encounter situations where we just don't know what to do, where we have to, as a teacher of mine once put it, make our reverent best guess. Sin has so marred the world and our lives and our ability to make decisions and the circumstances in which we make those decisions, that it is entirely possible to be in a circumstance where you have nothing but bad options. And yet we must make choices. We'll talk about this more endlessly. I'll bring this up. The purpose of Christian ethics is not to always make a perfect choice, because perfection makes assumptions that aren't always true in the context of a sinful world. The purpose of Christian ethics is to make faithful choices, loving choices. That is what we're trying to get at here. How do we make choices out of love, faithfulness toward God, and love for ourselves and our neighbor and our God around pregnancy, and especially when we are contemplating ending a pregnancy? So what the statement has said is, well, is there a clear and present threat to the life of the woman? Is there an extreme fetal abnormality? Was this a case of an unwanted pregnancy due to rape, incest, or some other situation where there was no possibility of not getting pregnant, though the woman didn't have a choice in the matter? Well, then those are all situations where terminating the pregnancy by induced abortion can be contemplated. Is there a case of extreme economic poverty? Things like that? Well, that's probably a case where we want to look at adoption. But these are generalities. Every specificity is going to be unique. And we can't know your heart. A pastor's job, my job, is not to guilt anyone who's watching this video. If you have had to make any decision related to abortion, then to be perfectly frank, I think that the church and society have already failed you. And those failures need to be accounted for before God, long before anything that you may or may not have done comes up. And I want you to hear this. Nothing you do or have done can separate you from the love of God. And nothing you do or have done excuses the government and the policies that helped to craft the situation in which you found yourself. And so we'll talk about what appropriate government policy might be around the termination of pregnancies next time. Thank you for joining me, and until then, God bless.